faithfully sharing insights, delving into great books from around the world. Hi there, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're diving into a book titled Summit, subtitled Six Heads of State Meetings That Shaped the 20th Century. And while talking about, 20th century international politics, you just can't avoid the term summit. Hmm. So, what exactly is a summit? A summit is basically a gathering of top national leaders to tackle big diplomatic problems head on. And it's a modern thing from 224 to the Cold War's end, spanning half a century. Summits turned into pivotal points shaping history, truly a modern innovation. You see, before the 20th century, travel was tough, so leaders' trips took forever, making it impossible to ditch other duties. And plus, security wasn't easy to ensure. So, starting in the 16th century, nations used ambassadors and foreign ministries for diplomacy. It was the 20th century and the rise of airplanes that finally shifted things. With aviation booming, leaders could meet up without hassle, chatting within just hours. Oh, and there were two other factors that helped summits take off. Uh, First, weapons of mass destruction posed a massive danger, and only big power leaders could negotiate to keep them in check. Second, sound newsreels came about, and leaders loved using summits to craft their public image. So, the book covers six key 20th century summits by Cambridge's Professor David Reynolds, who dives deep into each one, unpacking all the details. All right, next up, we're journeying with the author to relive these six summits, seeing firsthand how they clashed and changed history, beginning with the most notorious one. The Munich Conference happened back in 1938. Back then, Nazi Germany and Czechoslovakia were fighting over who controlled the Sudetenland. Where exactly is the Sudetenland? It was part of Czechoslovakia right next to Germany, and it used to be under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When the Austro-Hungarian Empire broke up after WW1, Sudetenland went to Czechoslovakia. But folks in Sudetenland spoke German and felt really connected to Germany. In 1933, Hitler took charge and brazenly demanded Lebensraum for Germans willing to risk war. So annexing Sudetenland became a crucial step in his expansion plan. Czechoslovakia was under British protection, but the UK, still haunted by WW1's brutality, feared getting dragged into another war. Based on intelligence, PM Chamberlain judged Hitler unlikely to use force over Sudetenland. So he decided to meet Hitler to resolve the crisis peacefully. In diplomacy, they say intelligence determines whether to attend summits, but true intelligence only comes at the summit itself. This exposed summit diplomacy's risk. Chamberlain misread intelligence, misjudging Germany's will and strength. At Munich, he got led by the nose. Militarily, Britain overestimated the Luftwaffe's power. Chamberlain feared that if war broke out, Germany's air force could immediately launch massive raids on London. Politically, Chamberlain couldn't grasp Hitler's endgame. Was it just Sudetenland for ethnic unity or ruling all Europe? Today we know Hitler's real aim was occupying all Czechoslovakia. Yet Chamberlain hoped to trade a slice of Czechoslovakia to curb German expansion. At the table, Chamberlain lost ground. His weak bottom line showed surrender too early. Hitler noticed this and pressed hard. He was quick-witted, calculating, and used dramatic outbursts to show resolve. This worked well, repeatedly intimidating attendees. Finally, Munich produced an agreement. Britain, France, Germany, and Italy signed the Munich Pact, sacrificing Czechoslovakia by ceding Sudetenland to Nazi Germany, averting war for now. Czechoslovakia got betrayed without even attending. Had Munich prevented war, it wouldn't be a historical disgrace. But the next fall, Hitler invaded Poland, forcing Britain to declare war on Germany. Thus began 201, making Britain Munich's biggest loser. Next, the second summit was the most superficially united yet deeply divided. The 1945 Yalta Conference featured leaders from the US, USSR, and UK. As War II neared its end, the US, UK, and USSR began building a new world order, hoping to settle post-war interests in one meeting. Since it involved dividing interests, conflicts were inevitable. Roosevelt urgently pursued two goals. First, he wanted to establish the United Nations. Second, he hoped the USSR would shift focus from Europe to fight Japan in Asia. Churchill prioritized post-war European security and distrusted the Soviets. He'd stated that if the Soviets swallowed Eastern Europe, he wouldn't stand by. But Roosevelt and Churchill faced Stalin, who wanted lost territories like Eastern Poland and the Baltic coast. Thus, the USSR sought greater influence and potentially global revolution. Their interests clashed sharply. Oh, the leaders also knew little about each other. Roosevelt was overly optimistic, barely understanding the USSR, even thinking it lacked ambition. Churchill watched Soviet moves closely, but after visiting Moscow, trusted Stalin as a negotiator. Ironically, though, Stalin saw the wartime alliance as temporary, raking it was fine if beneficial. History repeats, huh? Like Munich, the toughest stance won at Yalta, Stalin's. He was brilliantly shrewd. In negotiations, he'd let others speak first, waiting to counterattack. His remarks were brief but deadly precise, leaving opponents guessing. Plus, he was fiercely goal-driven with clear objectives and masterful at timing concessions. This showed in handling Poland, a key Yalta issue with two aspects. First, how to redraw Poland's borders. Second, how to form Poland's post-war government. Basically, rebuilding a nation and deciding whose sphere it'd be in. With Poland liberated by Soviet troops, Stalin held more chips. First, territorially, eastern Poland bordered the Soviet Union. If the border shifted westward, the USSR would grab more Polish land. Back in 1920, after WWI, British Foreign Secretary Curzon proposed Poland's new eastern border, the Curzon Line. Following this line would push Soviet territory 200 to 300 kilometers west. Why wouldn't Stalin want that? So when Roosevelt asked to assign an oil field east of the Curzon Line to Poland, Stalin flatly refused. He even hypocritically said, Britain proposed this line, not us Soviets. Well, since Poland lost land, they'd be compensated at northern or western borders, mainly involving Germany. Stalin happily let Poland take German territory, weakening post-war Germany while winning Poland over. Churchill and Roosevelt hated this, but after arguing, conceded Poland must gain northern or western lands. Beyond territory, Poland's government structure was another heated issue. After 211 began, Poland's government exiled to Britain, while the USSR installed a provisional one in Warsaw. This caught the US and UK completely off guard. All they could do was refuse recognizing this new government. To gain recognition, Stalin offered a trade. Earlier, he demanded 16 UN seats, one for each Soviet republic. Truth is, he never cared about the UN, so he dropped the seat demand at the right moment. Roosevelt deeply valued the UN. So after Stalin appeased him, the US, UK compromised on Poland, a pattern repeating across issues where the big three mostly got their way. Roosevelt got Soviet commitment against Japan. Churchill secured France's place. But Stalin was the real winner. The USSR regained territories lost since Tsarist times, plus massive reparations. Afterward, the Soviet Union treated the post-war system with condescension. Within 4 years of 2012's end, East and West plunged into the Cold War. As Stalin said, wartime alliances are marriages of convenience. On that point, he was absolutely right. These two summits bookended 200 and taught us a lesson. Summit negotiations are risky. The toughest side usually gains more. But what if all negotiators are equally tough? Next up is the century's most disastrous summit. Kennedy and Khrushchev's 1961 Vienna meeting. Afterward, US-Soviet tensions exploded, pushing humanity to nuclear brink. Soon after 2002, the world split into US or Soviet blocs, starting the Cold War. By 1957, Khrushchev's missile program gave Soviet strike capability against mainland U.S. The U.S. panicked and launched spy operations against Soviet activities. And in 1960, a U-2 spy plane got shot down over USSR, freezing relations. Facing domestic pressure, Khrushchev sought a summit to ease tensions. Newly elected President Kennedy believed U.S.-Soviet roots couldn't be solved by talks, but agreed to meet, hoping to prevent nuclear war. Kennedy wanted joint arms control and nuclear test bans. And Berlin was Vienna's central issue. Germany had split. Communist East Germany and capitalist West Germany. Berlin, too, was split. East Berlin to East Germany, West Berlin to West Germany, with Western troops stationed there, making it an island in East German territory. Since East Germany wasn't recognized by US, UK, France, Khrushchev demanded they sign a peace treaty recognizing it, or else he'd blockade West Berlin. Kennedy only wanted the status quo. He told Khrushchev, "How you treat East Germany is your business, but Western access to Berlin concerns U.S. interests." Oh, Khrushchev flew into a rage, shouting, "America's humiliating the Soviet Union." Khrushchev was super emotional. The moment he felt insulted, he'd switch topics to morally dominate the conversation. At the summit, he brought up twice that 20 million Soviets perished in 2000, and his own fallen son. Kennedy had to stay silent. Finally, Khrushchev snapped, "If America wants war over Germany, bring it." Kennedy hit back just as hard. He stated, "Any breach of peace accords is pure provocation." Neither leader budged. No agreement on arms or nukes, not even on Berlin. And the summit ended badly. After Vienna, U.S.-Soviet tensions boiled over. Khrushchev demanded Berlin be settled within 1961. He gave West Berlin an ultimatum: pull out Western troops. West Berlin. Back home, the Soviets stopped demobilizing troops and mobilized reserves, acting ready for war. Kennedy made it clear: peace matters, but he'd never cave to threats of war. Kennedy studied this hard. If Berlin blew up, U.S. forces would act. Truth is, Khrushchev never planned to go to war. But with Kennedy standing firm, Khrushchev had to ditch signing a loan with East Germany and find a softer approach. The Berlin crisis soon saw a guarded zone built, splitting East and West Berlin, the famous Berlin Wall. Berlin was split clean in half, and the crisis cooled. But after the wall, Khrushchev did his craziest thing, putting nukes in Cuba, sparking the Cuban Missile Crisis, and heightening the Cold War. In the late 50s, the US and UK set up missiles in allies near the USSR to hit Soviet soil. The Soviets saw Cuba, hostile to the US, as perfect for missiles, threatening DC from America's backyard to counter them. The U.S. spotted Soviet moves via U-2 spy planes and spies, then went public. Surprisingly, the Soviets kept going, shipping missiles to Cuba anyway. By mid-October 1962, U.S. forces went on alert. Troops flooded Florida near Cuba, and over 200 ships patrolled nearby. This missile crisis became the Cold War's fiercest standoff. But publicly, both sides traded fierce threats without backing down. They eventually agreed through secret channels to dismantle threatening missiles and withdraw forces from conflict zones. Humanity pulled back from the brink, making U.S. USS actions more cautious afterward. Summit diplomacy does carry high risks. Vienna not only proved this, but showed that with tough negotiators, summits can backfire, escalating conflicts uncontrollably. A decade after Vienna, U.S.-Soviet leaders finally met again, successfully breaking the ice. In 1972, President Nixon visited the USSR, meeting Soviet leader Brezhnev in Moscow. Nixon and Brezhnev's Moscow summit became one of the most productive ever. The summit successfully eased Cold War tensions. First, timing was right. Both nations faced crises needing deterrent. The Vietnam War still raged, trapping America. The USSR, while nuclear strong and aggressive, had economic woes and worsening China relations. Just then, U.S. ping-pong teams visited China, warming Sino-US ties, alarming the Soviets. Clearly, both superpowers needed reduced tensions. The summit's centerpiece was the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT, covering long-range bombers, missiles, warheads, and missile subs. Though disagreements remained on missile ranges and silo numbers, they signed an interim agreement, and they happily planned a follow-up. Brezhnev would visit America next summer, an outcome both desired. So how should we evaluate this Moscow summit? It stabilized U.S.-Soviet relations, becoming a key turning point in Cold War detente. But we should realize, as Nixon said, détente doesn't mean the danger's gone. After that, the Cold War dragged on for nearly 20 more years. Moving beyond Moscow, the fourth major summit of the century was an innovative attempt. That's the Camp David Summit, the first conference dedicated to Middle East peace. Held in 1978 at the U.S. President's Retreat, Camp David, it lasted 13 days, with President Carter participating, with Israeli PM Begin and Egyptian President Sadat attending. It birthed the Land for Peace principle. Israel and Egypt were bitter Middle East rivals. Israel, a Jewish state, faced Arab hostility over religion, ethnicity, and land, with their 30-year conflict unresolved. From 1948 to 1973, 4 Middle East wars erupted. In these wars, Israel seized territories from Arab neighbors and established Jewish settlements. Arab states denied Israel's legitimacy too, making the Middle East crisis seem unsolvable. With neither side backing down, breakthroughs were impossible alone. Forcing U.S. mediation, President Carter was passionate, eager to find comprehensive peace solutions. He first sought a breakthrough between Israel and Egypt. Oh, these three leaders had quite distinct diplomatic styles. Carter was a pragmatist who valued human rights, though sometimes idealistic. And Egypt's Sadat, while peace-loving like Carter, lacked patience, rushed outcomes, and wouldn't compromise. Israel's Begin focused on details and tactics, but nitpicked wording, often misunderstood others, a tough negotiator. So how to bring Sadat and Begin together for calm talks? This required leaders with superb judgment and communication skills. For example, with Sadat, avoid his hardline aides. With Begin, bring flexible diplomats. Finally, know when to let go. Leave unsolvable problems for tomorrow. Reserve disagreement for later, rather than expecting total victory at once. Oh, the 13-day Camp David summit was incredibly tough. Sadat wanted Israel to withdraw troops from occupied Egyptian territory and remove Jewish settlements. Begin naturally resisted, causing heated arguments where talks broke down. Facing deadlock, Carter shuttled between Sadat and Begin, sharing proposals and seeking compromises. When that failed, top delegates split the agreement into 2 documents for separate leader approval. On day 11, Carter tried taking a breather from intense negotiations, but that plan got shattered. He learned Sadat was leaving, a helicopter arranged, and Carter was stunned. He thought hard, praying for another solution. Finally, changing from resort wear to formal attire, he found Sadat looking exhausted and tense. At a loss for words, Carter asked if Sadat understood what leaving meant. Sadat said he knew. Carter continued, "First, it ends U.S.-Egypt relations. It also means all my peace efforts go to waste. It might even end my presidency. Lastly, and crucially, it ends what I treasure most, our friendship. Why do this?" This heartfelt plea moved Sadat deeply. He said he was leaving because Begin wouldn't sign anything. After heavy silence, he finally promised Carter he'd stay. In later talks, he overruled advisors and compromised on removing settlements. Ultimately, Camp David yielded rich results. 2 frameworks for Middle East peace were signed. The 30-year Egypt-Israel war ended. Sinai Peninsula returned to Egypt as Israeli troops withdrew. And Egypt and Israel established diplomatic relations, and the Land for Peace principle became crucial for resolving Middle East issues. But unfortunately, all 3 leaders involved later faced diminished legacies. Carter earned praise for his Camp David performance, Sadly, he lost the 1980 election to Reagan and left office. For Sadat, the cost was far higher. His concessions to Israel earned hatred across the Arab world. He was assassinated by extremists during a 1981 military parade. Begin faced condemnation for Israel's 1982 refugee massacre during the Lebanon War, resigning in disgrace in 1983. Still, Egypt and Israel peace became the Middle East's most significant breakthrough in decades, with all three leaders contributing greatly. So, in the author's view, Camp David stands as the 20th century's greatest diplomatic achievement. As time passed, we reached the century's final major summit. This was the 1985 Geneva meeting between the US and USSR, arguably the most candid meeting, with Soviet Gorbachev and US Reagan largely ending the Cold War arms race. Uh, since Khrushchev's era, the US-USS race had been on and off. Beneath peaceful appearances, both nations intensely devised attack methods and stockpiled strategic weapons. By the 1980s, the arms race escalated while both economies declined. So the Soviet situation worsened, with the arms race crippling its economy. Soviet leader Gorbachev believed the USSR needed systemic reform, cut military spending, and build peaceful cooperation with the West. Then, U.S. President Reagan proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, a space-based missile defense to intercept nukes. This would render nuclear arsenals useless, potentially ending the Cold War's nuclear threat foundation. And Reagan firmly believed he could end the Cold War and become a peace pioneer. To achieve this, he'd consistently invited Soviet leaders to summits since taking office. Finally, in 1985, both sides agreed to meet in Geneva, Switzerland. Gorbachev's top concern at the meeting was Star Wars, not accepting it, but reacting with shock and anger. So Reagan stressed SDI was defensive and even offered to share research, abandoning U.S. advantage. For the USSR, it was a lose-lose. Matching it was financially impossible. Not matching gave America military dominance. So Gorbachev fiercely opposed SDI, proposing 50% nuke cuts with America scrapped it. Gorbachev bluntly doubted America would share anti-nuke tech. But if America dropped Star Wars, the USSR would slash nukes significantly. With both sides deadlocked, silence fell until Gorbachev broke the stalemate. He gave up persuading Reagan on SDI, instead securing a joint declaration that nuclear war has no winner and must never occur, and both pledged to prevent space arms races and ultimately end all arms races. Afterward, both showed openness to future dialogue at all levels. By December 1987, Geneva bore fruit. Gorbachev visited America for the Washington summit. This time, the US and USSR agreed to cut nuclear stockpiles by 5%. The first ever nuke reduction by superpowers, the Cold War ended with a handshake. Thus concludes 6 20th century summits. 2 around 212, 4 during Cold War, all aimed for peace but yielding different outcomes due to era and leaders' traits. But as global dynamics changed, summits became less dramatic since the late 20th century. Well, with communication tech booming, leaders can just hop on calls anytime. Weapons of mass destruction are tightly controlled now, so summits aren't needed to diffuse crises. Personalized media grabs everyone's attention too, making summit news less eye-catching. Less that old model where 2 or 3 leaders decided world politics through negotiation doesn't fit the 21st century anymore. After the Cold War, the bipolar standoff vanished. The world entered an era with one superpower and multiple strong players. This means trade, security, and environmental issues need multilateral talks, not just bilateral meetings. Twice yearly EU summits and G8 meetings reflect this new reality. Still, these 6 21st century summits offer valuable lessons to avoid future conflicts and dangers. All right, that wraps up our coverage of Summit. The reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.